30 seconds to come in. Oh, start at the top of the hour, Sammy says.
Got it. Well, hello, and thank you everyone for joining us today for this session on the 2023 Workload and Compensation Report with John Cook. My name is Cody Hilliard. I am an SDR at Consensus, and I will be your moderator for today's session. DEMOFEST is presented by Consensus. Consensus is intelligent demo automation software that helps scale pre-sales with interactive video demos. You can learn more at goconsensus.com or view the automated micro demo at the link in the Docs tab on the right of your screen. Consensus is proud to provide this event for free to all attendees. However, we would like to invite each of you to donate to our company's humanitarian organizations if you would like to. You can learn more about this and donate by visiting the DEMOFEST Gives Back booth in our virtual expo hall in the Booths tab or at the link in the Docs tab on the right of your screen. We invite you to join us in our DEMOFEST community on Discord. Our community is where you can connect with speakers, get exclusive access to content and events, and where the conversation will continue long after DEMOFEST event has ended. We encourage all attendees to join us and so many others. You can join the community at the link in the Docs tab. We encourage you to participate in today's session. On the right side of your screen, you can see a few ways to engage with us throughout the session. The chat function will allow you to engage with us as well as other attendees. Throughout the session, you may see a few polls. We encourage you to participate as your feedback is important to us. Our speaker will be taking notes from the audience at the end of the session, but we encourage you to ask questions at any time through the Q&A box. If at any time you're having technical difficulties, head to the gear on the bottom of your screen, and here you'll see a help document to help troubleshoot common issues. And now I would like to introduce our speaker. John is the Vice President of Marketing here at Consensus. For the past 4 years, he's been searching out the brightest thought leaders in the pre-sale space, conducting original research, and generally making a nuisance of himself. He's the author of the Sales Engineering Compensation and Workload Study. And with that, I will turn the rest of the time over to you, John.
All right. Thank you, Cody. Excited to be here, everybody. And we are just about ready to dive in. All right, this has been a long time coming. I know many of you are well aware that some might even use the word late. I don't know, it's subjective, but it's going to be well worth the wait, I assure you. I'm excited to see a lot of familiar faces in the audience too. So let's go ahead and dive right in. The 2023 Sales Engineering Compensation and Workload Report. So a little bit about the report to begin with. We always go through just a little bit of demographics so that it's kind of helpful to know about whom we are speaking. So we gathered over 1,000 responses from all over the world. We've included summaries of the largest response bodies and so on. United States, UK, Europe are the usual suspects. That's where we get the most of our responses. And a little bit about the experience level. Median experience level was 5, though we have quite a few newbies in the less than a year mark, all the way out to the old guard at over 30 years in their position. Old guard. Did I mention they were old? No, I'm just kidding. So, and then we're split between individual contributors and leaders. You'll see those are generally the terms we use throughout the report. Individual contributors and leaders, as we kind of split those down, you can see what the breakdown is between those roles as well. Sorry, Peter. And we sometimes use SE interchangeably with IC as well. So I know there's it's not entirely non-contentious now as far as what the title is of ICs in the sales engineering and solutions consulting space, but we're gonna stick with the kind of the standard terminology there for the next little while. So the respondents that we're talking to, the ICs support between 4 and 5 solutions on average, and they self-report as mostly generalists with a fair smattering of specialists thrown in there as well. This is just a little bit of background of kind of how those identify who are responding to the report. All right, so let's jump in to the moment everybody's been waiting for first, which is on-target earnings. So whenever you see OTE throughout this report, it refers to on-target earnings. That's the combination of base salary and at risk, but does not include stock options, perks, and things like that. So we can see that I've drawn in a few lines here to indicate what the level was last year for each of these graphs. So it looks like in general, the leadership compensation may have gone up slightly, and IC compensation may have gone down slightly. I didn't mark in for Canada and Australia because our sample sizes are pretty small for those. But I suspect if we were to draw in our margins for error on each of these graphs, most of them would be within those margins for error, so I wouldn't worry too much about the rise or lift, except for maybe USA. That one's a fairly significant lift compared to last year on the leader side. Here is the overall chart. If you want to take a quick look at that, we're not going to dive into this too deeply, except to point out that we have included a few data points here to help sort of gauge context. So for instance, we now include not just the count of how many respondents fit this, how many respondents were in each bucket, but also the median years in experience for each one as well, and whether they receive stock options, and a little more data on quota. So what kind of quota does each person carry, and how likely are they to carry each different kind of quota? Okay, so we have, personal only quota, personal and team, no quota, team only quota. And so we can get a little bit more granular this year in that. And there's a lot of really fantastic data that has come out of tracking it this way, which I'm excited to get to. So let's talk about just a few things. We're not going to spend a ton of time on compensation because we've got a lot of other things to get to, and you'll get a chance to dive into this in the when you get the full report in your hands. But a few of the big impacts on wages. We know that, of course, years of experience is big. Whether you're a leader in IC is humongous, and so on. But a few other things that were a little bit less expected. Tenure has a greater impact on IC wages than it has on leader wages. So the longer you've been at your position as an IC, the more you can expect to make at a fairly consistent linear curve upward. With leaders, the rise isn't quite so steady. And there are several reasons that there may be for that, but we can definitely report that leaders do not see quite the same drastic differences based on tenure in their comp. So higher earners also report a lower AE to SE ratio. Usually, that's not always, Adam, it's not always, but very often there is definitely a correlation there between high earners and a lower overall AE to SE ratio. Customer size does predict OTE for ICs, but not necessarily for leaders. So ICs have known this for a long time. If you're selling into enterprise, you're generally going to tend to have larger deal sizes, things like that. So you're gonna be making more if you're an enterprise IC versus, say, a commercial IC or something like that. But not necessarily true for leadership. So that's something to pay attention to. Also, recently hired ICs report higher OTE than their tenured counterparts. This is something that we've seen the last couple of years as we've been measuring this. Sometimes it goes back to that old adage that sometimes the best way to get a raise is to change jobs. But that is not necessarily true of leadership, right? And some of that's intuitive, but I'm going to let you guys kind of dive into potential causal notions there as well. This will also rear its head again when we start to talk about stock options, which is here. So stock options seem to be a newer perk for ICs, as in the last 4 to 6 years. People who are reporting less time at their position are much more likely to report receiving stock options than their counterparts who have been there, especially than their counterparts who have been in their positions for 7 years or more. You can see it drops drastically for individual contributors down here. And the same is actually even true of leaders, where less tenured leaders are still more likely to report receiving stock options as part of their perks than their more tenured counterparts out from the 4+ year mark. Although leaders in general are much more likely to report stock options than ICs in general. So stock options coming into vogue, not just for leadership, but also for ICs over the last little while. All right, so personal quotas. This is one of those things where this is just going to be a grenade in the room, it seems like, perhaps, but here's what the data suggests. Personal quotas are a major predictor of higher OTE, which we might expect, but not just OTE, base salary. So if you're carrying a personal quota as an IC, you're much more likely to have a larger base salary, not just on target earnings with your at risk. And if you want to learn more on this, Delia Parman is doing a fantastic session here at DEMOFEST, talking about what happened when she introduced personal quotas on her team and how the world didn't, in fact, implode, but rather things got much, much better on several fronts, including the way the pre-sales was perceived at the org. So check that out if you want more information on this. But it's not a small amount. An IC with a personal quota is expected to make about $30K more than someone with no quota. That's a big, big jump. All right. Now, here's one that I'm really excited to jump into. So we're going to leave compensation behind, and we're going to jump into pre-sales activity alignment. All right. So here's what we're talking about here. This chart is going to bear a little bit of explaining, so I'm going to take you through it step by step. Here's what we did. The first thing that we did was we asked people to rank the following pre-sales functions in the order of how much time they required. And for those of you who slogged through this, my survey software wasn't super great at making this intuitive and easy. So thank you all for persevering. For those of you who participated in the survey, I am not using that same method again next year, so it will be much, much easier. You'll be happy to hear. So these are the activities: technical demos, discovery, intro demos, planning and architecting solutions, POCs, consulting calls, prospect support, product knowledge improvement, RFPs, and other. Now, I realize that different people have slightly different definitions for these, but even taking that into account, what we found was that the relationships here were very, very robust. So this is how our respondents ranked these activities in terms of how much time they took. Okay. The next thing we asked, and this is important, was we asked respondents to rank these same activities in terms of impact. And the way we asked it was this. We said, would you please rank the following items in terms of how much impact they'd have on your success if you could spend more time on them? So the way to think about this is, on the left side, where are we spending our time? On the right side, where should we be spending our time? Where would we rather be spending our time, according to our SEs and leaders? All right. And here's what we came up with: discovery at the top, and then technical demos, and planning and architecting solutions, and on and on. Yes, Peter, discovery is number one. Now, the next obvious question is, how are we doing at spending our time? versus how we should be spending our time. And some very interesting things came up. One is that 5 of these 10 items came up exactly ranked exactly 1-to-1 across. Pre-sales is not dumb. The house is not in complete disarray. Things are fairly well aligned. Half of these things line up perfectly. Okay, so 0 misalignment on the left and the right. Now, 3 more items came up as ranked only 1 rank off. That's not huge, right? We'd rather do more discovery than we're doing. It's currently second on the amount of time we're spending. We'd rather it were first. But technical demos and discovery, we rank as number 1 and number 2, right? So they're maybe 1 rank off, but we'd always rather do some more discovery if we could. Also, planning and architecting solutions is just the 1 rank off. We would rather it were 1 rank higher than it is. And then we have this outlier here of product knowledge improvement. Product knowledge improvement is 4 ranks off. It's ranked 4 higher, or 4 ranks higher than it currently gets time for. So people are calling through this mechanism for greater time to be able to spend on product knowledge improvement. And then we have the rogue. And the rogue outlier is intro demos. It is ranked as number 3 as far as how much time it takes, and only behind RFPs and other as far as how useless it is to moving the needle if we could spend more time on it. All right. Now, it's ranked high up there. You might call it a necessary evil, but as far as its overall impact on moving the needle, it's ranked very lowly. And so here we find some of our major misalignments. Okay, product knowledge improvement, we wish we could spend more time, and intro demos, we wish we could spend way less. All right, and so that's what we're looking at when we look at this chart. Now, what's cool about this is we can then start to track how misaligned individual respondents are. Okay, so we can track if technical demos is 1 off, we can add that to the equation, and discovery is 1 off, we can add that to the equation, and we can start to figure out, we can start to grade how aligned we are in individual orgs with where we ought to be spending our time. So and we'll come back to that in just a moment. We'll see, because we're going to start to track all of the things that predict better alignment versus worse alignment. Okay. Okay. So let's talk about preserving work-life. That is improving work-life. This isn't work-life balance. This is purely work-life. So we asked ICs and leaders if we could do one thing, if work could do 1 or 2 or a few things to improve your work life, what would be the most impactful? Okay. And here you can see the responses down at the bottom. Hire more people in my department to share the workload. Allocate increased budget for tools and technology to enable my department. Publicly recognize my department for our contribution to the organization. And what do we have in the middle here? Make available to pre-sales the same perks and incentives available to sales. Next to that, we have reduce repetitive tasks so that my team can be more strategic and consultative/creative in my work, and then other on the far right. And here we have what Rex would call the Burj Khalifa in the middle. Krista, these are not going to be a handout right after the call, but the full report in PDF format is coming out I'll have a release time frame at the very end of the presentation. So, number 1, make available to pre-sales the same perks and incentives available to sales. I'm going to let that sit there, and y'all can discuss. All right, pre-sales reports less influence and recognition relative to sales year over year. Now, the way we ask this is relative to sales, how much influence and recognition does pre-sales have within your organization? The same, less, much less, more, much more. Now, this is a consistent result where pre-sales consistently feels they have less influence relative to sales. That's not news. However, the number of people over on this left side is increased year over year versus last year. So as we've kind of witnessed an economic turndown and so on, it seems like maybe people are kind of rushing back to some old ways and some old ideas about where the highest leverage point is in the sales process. And there's no denying that sales is there closer to the end of the line when it comes to typically closer to the end of the line when it comes to the sales process. So they tend to be much more visible in that regard. Also, growth of pre-sales influence has slowed compared to a year ago. Now, the question is, does pre-sales have more or less influence at your organization compared to 1 year ago? And this is still consistent as well. Most people say they have either the same or more influence compared to a year ago. However, the number of people over on this right side versus on this left side also shrank slightly year over year. So where it was 90% in the last report, now it's down to somewhere around 86%. So it's not a huge drop, just a slowing of what we might call progress, dare we say. All right, now let's talk about demo lag times for a minute. So lower demo lag times actually predict higher pre-sales influence. So those who report less pre-sales influence, less change in influence year over year, are also likely to report higher demo lag times. Okay. And those who report more influence year over year are likely to report lower demo lag times. Now, a quick word on some of these results, by the way. You might see only marginal differences here. I would like to give a quick shout out to my data scientist, Kevin Willardson, who is a PhD, Dr. Kevin Willardson, who's a PhD and has run these through some super robust statistical tests. We control for everything. The difference in data quality from the time we first started this report to now is just phenomenal. So when we report a correlation, it is ironclad and bulletproof. If there was too much noise, we ignored it. If there was not enough sample size, we ignored it. So what we're seeing here are really bulletproof correlations and examples and predictors. So let's go to this old chestnut. So this is the amount has stayed more or less the same. The median is still 30% of pre-sales demos that are unqualified. The big news here is what it predicts. So it turns out that unqualified demos are not just inconvenient, they actually predict several things that are going to present as fairly important to us going forward here. All right, and so the first thing that they predict is more unqualified demos predict greater misalignment of time spent, not just, we're calling out intro demos here, but actually across everything. So what we have here is a kind of a misalignment quotient, if you will, on the y-axis. All right, so the higher the bar reaches, the more misalignment there is between where we are spending our time and where we should be spending our time. You remember those charts from a little while ago? So higher is worse. All right, and down here on the x-axis, we're looking at the percentage of demos that are unqualified. As those rise, what we're looking at in the left chart here is misalignment across all activities. All right, so the more unqualified demos you have coming through to pre-sales, the more it screws up all of the other activities alignments. All right, everything's more likely to be off, not just intro demos. All right, everything's more likely to be off. But over here on the right, you can see that when we limit down to intro demos, the relationship is obviously much stronger, right? The more unqualified demos are coming through, the more people are likely to rate intro demos as a much more severe mismatch between how much time it's taking and how effective it is. All right, so that's how to read those two charts. Next, ICs overburdened with unqualified demos report lower influence and recognition relative to sales. Possibly not a surprise there, but it is the correlations are holding true right the way through all of the different data pieces. All right. So change in pre-sales influence over here and influence relative to sales over here. If we have a higher percentage of unqualified demos, we are much more likely to report less influence, less gains year over year in pre-sales influence within the org, and less influence relative to sales for pre-sales within the org. All right. And that brings us to the next thing that I want to talk about, which is burnout. This is the first year we started tracking any stats with regard to burnout in pre-sales. And what's remarkable here in this section is not just the correlations we find, but equally remarkable are the correlations we didn't find. And we'll start with one of those. And the first one that we'll begin with is, can you buy your way out of burnout? Is there a correlation between burnout and OTE? Give me your predictions in the chat. Drum roll, please. What do you think? Can you buy your way out of burnout? I'm hearing no's. It's hard to maintain it. Yeah. That's tough. Definitely tough, Peter. All right. Negatory. All right. Good luck is what I'm hearing. Mark could put a price on it. All right. So temporarily, it depends. Interesting. All right. If the number is large enough. All right. So that's kind of sort of what I was expecting, and the answer, as you've all correctly predicted, is no. But please try. Right. So if I'm going to have to burn out. If I'm going to have to burn out, then I'd rather be a rich burnout than a poor burnout, generally speaking. But and Natasha, a great point, Natasha, is by buying tooling to automate tasks, and we will get there. That's a little foreshadowing from Natasha in the chat. All right, so let's talk about burnout. The first thing is there is no correlation between burnout and OTE. So yeah, making more does not save you. There are things, however, that will save you and save your people, and we will dive into that. So nearly 22% of ICs, 31% of leaders report feeling at least some symptoms of burnout. Here, we took the burnout test from one that had been totally beaten up statistically and laid on the anvil and hammered on, and it seems like it holds up. So the question is at the top, overall, based on your definition of burnout, how would you rate your level of burnout? And the individual responses, these are summarized but never, occasionally stressed, feeling some symptoms of burnout, feeling persistent symptoms of burnout, and burned out at the end. And we let people kind of self-identify what that means. And that seems to work pretty well across multiple industries and multiple different survey types of this kind. So most of pre-sales is doing all right. Doing okay over here on this side, but we've got some teams that are really struggling. So what are the predictors? Well, there are many causes of burnout, and there are some that are usual suspects, such as hours worked and the number of crunch weeks that we're putting in, right? Other predictors of burnout that also are not super surprising, but it's nice to see the statistical correlation, are things like lack of influence and recognition, misalignment of time and resources. So our misalignment quotient, like how misaligned are the things you're doing versus how we should be doing those things. The more misaligned you are, the more burned out you're likely to feel. Contract size is a predictor of burnout, and as are unqualified demos. And these correlate to an intent to leave, which we measure. Part of how we measure intent to leave is how long people have been in their current position. If people have only just barely moved, then those are some of the ways that we can check how mobile people are within the industry, right? All right, so one indicator of burnout. We're back to this slide. Misallocation of time and resources fuels burnout. Okay, and we can see some of this over here on the right. So this is kind of one of those ways that we calculate negative and positive difference between the left side and the right side. And then what we do is we took the average squared mismatch in order to demonstrate kind of the relationship here. And you can see that the mismatch, as mismatch rises, as these charts rise, as these bars rise, so too does the likelihood to report more burnout than others. The next on the, let's see, how are we doing for time? We're on 11:30, I think. All right, so we're doing all right. Next, we have unqualified demos. Now, this is one that feeds through several different channels into burnout, but it feeds through the likelihood to feel less valued. It feeds through the likelihood to have less recognition relative to sales, etc., in the organization. And there's a strong correlation here between unqualified demos and burnout, to the extent, get this, to the extent that in the context of burnout, a 10% increase in unqualified demos is equivalent to permanently adding 4 hours to the work week. Okay, so going from, I think our average is 40 or 41 up to 44 or 45 hours consistently. Like if you just said your work week is now 45 hours and when it was 40 before, that's what a 10% increase in unqualified demos does to the perception of burnout. So I found that huge. Like if your unqualified demo rate goes up by 20%, it's almost like you just added a full extra work day to your people. So beware unqualified demos. And by the way, there are ways to reduce those unqualified demos, and I've got some people in this session who I know can give some advice on that. I think I saw Tom in there, and he'll set you straight. He'll set you right on how to get rid of those unqualified demos. So let's jump to ICs. So average consideration relative to sales by burnout level. Okay. People who report lower influence relative to sales are much more likely to report higher burnout than people who feel valued in the organization somewhere on the order of sales. So not many people felt, that is, some people felt that they were right about there on the same level. It is a major predictor. It is a major predictor of how your people are feeling it relative to burnout. And this is one that didn't necessarily reach out as obvious to me, but the pressure of high stakes deals also seems to predict burnout. So if you're dealing with much higher deal values, it is a strong predictor of higher burnout. All right. When you get to the much higher levels, right? So here's our total contract value on the left side and burnout here along the bottom. You can see it's a major uptick when you get to the high levels of burnout. They are much more likely to be dealing with higher contract values. Okay, and lastly, that leaves burnout behind, and we're going to progress on to our final section of the report, which deals with demo automation. This is all kinds of automation. We also asked people, we didn't ask people just about whether they're automating any portion of the demo. There was another question on whether they were using consensus specifically, and there were some kind of gratifying results there. I'm not sure we'll be able to go into all of those in this session, but absolutely, Peter. that does hurt much more. All right, so on to demo automation. Majority of organizations are automating some portion of the demo process, more than half, which is kind of nice to see as that ticks up a little bit over time. The firms who automate a portion of the demo process actually report less burnout. So that's good news, right? There are, when we looked at ways that we can improve work life for pre-sales pros, the number one was make the same perks available to pre-sales as there are for sales. The number two was reduce repetition and allow your people to become more consultative. And that is really one of the primary value props of demo automation. So it's nice to see that it's working somewhat. Firms who automate a portion of the demo process are reporting less burnout. And demo automation also helps to support a higher AE to SE ratio, which we would have expected to see, but it's nice to see the statistics kind of bearing that out. In future, we'll get better at measuring this. For instance, measuring how long demo automation has been in place, and things like that. That'll help us to gauge impact here a little bit more. If you want to see more about this, then feel free to check out our case studies on demo automation on our website. And you'll be able to see some of the specific impacts that demo automation has on individual things like AE to SE relationship, AE to SE ratio rather, unqualified demos, and sales cycle, close rates, all of that kind of good stuff. All right, and next, we also find that automation frees up ICs to focus on more customized and in-depth demos. So we measure how many man hours it takes per demo, right? That's one of those things that we ask. And what we find is that when people automate, they're able to take a little more time on the live demos that they're doing, because demo automation is not one of those things that if you're unfamiliar with the 6 demo types, some of the consensus thought leadership on 6 demo types, of those 6, there are many that can be automated, but there is one and maybe 2 that we do not recommend automating, and especially the technical deep dive demo, where the customer is going to want somebody in person, and you're able to focus more on that demo and take a little more time on that demo when you're not spending all of your time on these repetitive intro demos that we know are completely out of whack as far as how much time they take versus the contribution to the bottom line. So nice to see that automation is aiding there, just in where we can spend our time. And again, automation optimizes IC time to be able to be spent on these more high impact activities. So automation predicts less misalignment, right? So we measure the total misalignment quotient between that left and right side as far as how much time we're spending on these individual activities. Automation does predict an improvement in that alignment. So we're spending our time much more closely to where we ought to be spending it. All right, and that brings us, I think I did pretty well, bringing us to about the 11:40 mark there. We're a little bit, just about 2 minutes shy, and we'll go ahead and open up to a Q&A. And if nobody has any questions, because nobody ever has any questions about this, then I'll give y'all back a little bit of time.
We did have one question, John. Is there any adjustments for company ARR to variation in?
Let's see. Can you restate that question? Are there any adjustments
for company ARR to variation in?
Let me see if I can. Let's see. Any adjustment for, let's say, company 8? Oh, I think there's more to that question. Just hit the read more. There we go.
Thank you, John. In compensation, for example, SEs at companies over X number ARR fall into a comp range of ABC, while companies under X number ARR have a comp range.
You know what's interesting about that is No. So we controlled for a lot of different factors, and company size was much more of a determining factor than ARR was. Um, your own company size, and then the size of the customer that you're selling into. If you're an IC, as I mentioned, if you're a leader, the size of the company you're selling into doesn't have as much of an impact, but the size of your own company definitely has a much more major impact than the other. Now, whether the size of your own company is tied to how much ARR they're making, which you very often is, you'll that's entirely likely. But when we control for things like that, if there's any noise, in other words, if there statistically speaking, if there are other variables that are also strongly correlated, they'll just create too much noise for us to be able to point definitively and say this is a predictor. So ARR may have gotten lost a little bit in that shuffle just because company size is such a comparable predictor, let's say. So I can't say that there is none, but I can say that it did not surface once we controlled for things like company size.
Awesome. Thank you, John. We did have one question earlier. We believe there was a typo, but we had a question about the minimum salary for individual contributors in the USA. Would that be 51,500? Is that the correct number?
Let's see. So let's go back in time here. What's the segment we're looking for?
It was one of the earlier slides about the minimum salaries across different regions, and it
And we're
was
looking for which region?
USA. It was showing 5,000 or 515,000.
I believe that was supposed to be 51.5.
Okay.
Typo. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Making a note. Yeah.
We do have another
The minimum
question.
salary is not 515,000. I can confirm. The minimum salary in the USA is not 515,000 for individual contributors. So I'm just making a note of that.
Good call out.
Thank you. And that is, yeah. All right, next. You are correct, by the way. So I'm thinking that there's an extra zero on that. I expect that to be 51.5.
Okay. And how do organizations leverage an automated demo? Is this a high-level recording shared to prospects?
It's a great question. So the way demo automation works is, well, let's talk about what it isn't for a minute. So you can't just hit record on your demo and record your half an hour, 45-minute intro demo and send it, because nobody watches it. And there'll be plenty of people probably in the chat who are willing to chime in on this, because I know several are implementing demo automation in their own processes right now. However, at a high overview, what happens is what you need is a way to send a personalized demo, somewhat like you might give in a live demonstration. In other words, you're going to have some way for the demo to do a little bit of discovery and then tailor the resulting demo to the viewer, to each individual viewer. The way Consensus does that is the pre-sales team is going to create a library of short clips, somewhat shorter and somewhat longer clips on each topic. And then when the demo goes out, the demo is going to ask which topics are the most important and to the individual who's watching. And then it will dynamically stitch together video clips and documents and click-through tours of the product itself in order to give whatever depth is appropriate to that individual viewer. And so the net result of that is that with one link, each individual member of the buying group gets to click in and get their own personalized demo experience. And by doing that, what you do, then all of that feeds back to the sales rep, by the way, and to the pre-sales team, so that they can see what was clicked, what the priorities look like, and what the viewing looks like in that automated demo. And by doing that, you can qualify prospects for further pre-sales engagement, etc. I know we've got several people in the chat. Tom Edwards is one who can speak to this. They managed at one of his organizations to reduce their unqualified demos from around 50% to less than 5. So that's kind of how demo automation works and how it helps to better align those activities. And there's a lot more to demo automation than that. That's just kind of a high level look at when you might use it, right? So you can use it to help qualify for pre-sales resources and implement what we call a DQL strategy. DQL stands for Demo Qualified Lead, and it is a systematic approach to how people qualify for pre-sales engagement and a pre-sales demo, live demo. I hope that helps answer that question. I'm happy to expound if there's more you'd like to know.
Yeah, thank you for that, John. Did we have any more questions? Feel free to drop anything that you would like to ask now.
I think there are quite a few more in there.
I have 2 showing right now that I've already asked, so.
Oh, are you in the Q&A section?
Yes, in the Q&A, I only have 2 showing.
Oh, that's strange. I'm seeing a bunch. I'll just go ahead and run through some of these. I may not have these in order, but let's see. Tom asks, can you provide a list of survey questions? Might be interesting for companies to see how their teams are responding versus your benchmarks. That is a great question. I've been wanting to do that for a little while, Tom, and I think we probably can, yes. In fact, I would love to make it part of the buyer level evaluation and so on that we just launched. For those who are unaware, we just launched a buyer enablement level evaluation on our website. So you can go and check that out if you would like to, but it's a way for you to kind of see a report card of how your company is doing at enabling buyers, and dovetails nicely in with some of this data. But yes, just a list of questions. I wouldn't mind providing that at all. And thanks for the compliments there, Tom, on the report. By the way, my data scientist is like, this is the best report you guys have put out so far. It's not even close, especially as far as the integrity of the data. Like everything is totally been hammered out to the point where it's any correlations we're mentioning are very, very robust. All right, so Alvin Regas asks, any data points on high-performing SEs being selected for club? And in the case of one-on-ones or one-to-ones or one-to-two SE to AE mappings, if the AEs are selected for club, are we seeing the SE also being recognized? Asking for a friend. It's a great question, Alvin, and we did not get that granular as far as what exactly the perks were. We do know that having perks like President's Club is super high on the list, on the priority list for AEs, that is for SEs. It's not something that they often get right now, but I cannot speak to whether individual AEs on a one-to-one pairing are going to club, but it'd be a great thing to check for next year's report. So I'll make a note of some of these questions and we'll see if we can incorporate them without bloating the report to the point where nobody finishes it. All right, so John Koskoski, did you gather any survey responses for AE to SE ratios? We did, and those held true, pretty true versus last year. So for instance, the median ratio still holds at 4-to-1. If that helps, the leaders still report staffing to a slightly lower ratio than that, but it usually shakes out to 4-to-1 as far as the AE to SE ratio. That is on average. There are some that are much higher, and there are some obviously that are lower than that. Access Group is one of those that's known for having a really high AE to SE ratio, and they've got demo automation in full swing, and they're just killing it on that front. So I hope that helps a little bit. All right, at the start, when you showed, this is from Charlie Delamere. But by the way, what time are we stopping, Cody? Do we have to end at top of the hour, or when do we stop?
It's at the top of the hour, so we still have just over 10 minutes.
Great. All right, so Charlie Delamere asks at the start when you showed compensation numbers, maybe I missed it, but were the numbers all in USD? It didn't seem to be labeled. Yes. So that is something to be aware of. When we measure comp, we did ask everybody to report the numbers in USD. But then what we did was we segmented them. We segmented them by the country that they lived in, and not necessarily just by the country, but by the currency in which they were actually paid. And that gets a little bit confusing. But what we found was that it was a major determiner of how high comp was, whether you were paid in, say, euros versus some other currency that would technically be in the in Europe, but not paid in the same currency. So the currency in which you're paid is actually a major determining factor as to how much you make. So we decided to unify everything across in USD, and then just segment by the currency in which the individual was paid. There's a whole note in the report that you'll be able to read through and kind of understand that a little bit better. But yes, and you note that it's not labeled. It is called out in the notes section in the actual report, but we should probably label that in some asterisks on the actual report. So I'll make a note of that as well. Label USD. All right. Dave Douglas asks, any thoughts about how companies adjust compensation based on location in the U.S.? Well, I can tell you that those who are getting paid in USD outstrip much of the rest of the world as far as their total comp. And there are several different reasons that you might look to for that. There are some, some other countries have different social infrastructures and things like that that play into this. But as far as absolute total comp goes, the U.S. is definitely nosed out in front there. So if you're going to pay people in the U.S., you're going to, generally speaking, need to be prepared to pay a little bit more to stay competitive. And John Kuskowski asks, any insight into average OTE in comparison to average deal size? Yes, they are definitely correlated. So OTE goes up as average deal size goes up. So if you are selling into now, whether it's average deal size or the size of your customer, right? That gets a little bit noisy as to what's more impactful, but generally speaking, you can say that selling into large enterprise is going to result in larger deal sizes, right? So whether it's the size of the customer or the size of the deal, the denoising that can be a little bit complicated, but in general, larger deal sizes, larger customers, larger OTE. All right, so Rhonda O'Kane, how do organizations leverage an automated demo? This is a high-level recording shared. I think we answered that one, Rhonda, I hope. If you have more questions, feel free to poke it in the chat, and Cody, just help me if there are more questions there. Jason Douglas. Oh, sorry, did you have something, Cody?
I did just want to tell you that mine's not refreshing. I only have 2 showing. So.
Okay, copy that. All right, so I'm going to have to jump to the chat probably myself. But so Jason Douglas asks, I may have missed this if you covered this early, for SEs who have base plus commission, what is the average percentage breakdown between base and commission / bonus? Now, that's a good question, and I can probably answer that, but I can't answer it on the spot. So I'll tell you what, let me make a quick note. I can tell you on the median side what that looks like, because the median OTE, let's take the U.S. for example, is being at 180,000. The median salary, let me see if I can find it here. The median salary for North America is as follows. Base salary, median base salary in North America is 135K. And so with the median OTE being 180, you can tell that that's, what is that, 65, 75? No, yeah, that's what's 180 minus 135? We're looking at $45,000 in at risk. So 45,000 out of 180. If somebody wants to do the math for us, you can see sort of what the average breakdown is of at risk versus base salary. Also, one thing I did fail to mention is that stock options do not predict lower OTE. This was something that I thought was very interesting. So very often in a negotiation, a salary negotiation, as I picture it in my head, and as I've seen it kind of play out in the real world, sometimes it's like, well, would you rather have more options, or would you rather have higher OTE? How does that package shake out? And generally speaking, if you get stock options, you also have higher OTE than other people. So I don't know if it's just one of those things where you kick across a certain threshold as an IC, and then suddenly everything just dumps on your head, higher OTE and stock options, but that's what we're seeing. If you have stock options, you also tend to have higher OTE. So something to be aware of in your next one-on-one. All right, Eli Von Radecki. Let's see, we only have a few minutes here. I'm going to try and get to as many of these as I can. Eli asks, will you be looking at breaking compensation down to identify to which extent there are potential compensation gaps affecting minorities? Now, this is something that we have not dived into at all in the compensation report. We've never identified, asked people to self-identify by any ethnic group, race, sexual orientation, gender, any of those kinds of things. We thought about perhaps this next year just diving into the gender side of things, but it becomes reporting on that can become somewhat contentious, and I'm not entirely sure that that's something that we're going to bite off in the near future. We kind of like it to just stay fairly neutral as far as this report goes, but we're hoping that it's helpful to you as is. So Jason asks, I put this in. Let's see. Another one from John says, how granular do you have OTE versus deal size data by region and smaller scales? We have it fairly granular. Deal size is a predictor, along with as I said, the customer size that you're selling into. Granular doesn't always mean better, because noise can obscure the relationship there a little bit. Jason asks, 75% base, 25% commission bonus to the peers. Thanks for answering. Yep, great. Tara. All right. Hey, Tara. Great to have you. As you reviewed the insights from the survey, what are the top questions you wish you would have asked? Oh, that's a great question. Where do you want to dig next, and what will you ask differently next time? Oh, gosh, you're putting me on the spot. I don't have my long list of snafus in front of me where I was like, oh, why didn't I ask this? But there are several things I think that we're excited to dive into next year, a little bit more into burnout. We want to dive more into how long people have been using different strategies to determine what effect they might have. In other words, let's say somebody has been using demo automation for 5 years versus somebody who just started. Are they more likely to report a better alignment, or are they more likely to report lower unqualified demos than, all of that kind of stuff. The alignment of the alignment versus impact of activities is an area that I think is just so ripe for diving into more than we are right now. So really excited to get more out of that in the coming years as well. But as far as the full list, oh gosh. See, the problem is the survey is pretty long, as those of you who have participated already know. But so anytime I put something in, I've got to kind of take something out. I would love to get more participation from AE and sales counterparts of the pre-sales respondents. So next year, my big ask would be, let's get both sides of the table responding to some of this if we can. And I'm not sure exactly what I'm going to have to do in order to carrot the salespeople, but let's get both sides talking about this, and then we can really start to see, especially in as much as sales is the pre-sales customer there. But I'd love to see more in that. All right, that is me out of time. We're down to the top of the hour. Thank you, everybody, for coming. And back over to you, Cody.
Yeah, that's going to wrap it up. I believe everyone is getting pushed out as we speak. So thanks again, John.
All right. Take care, everyone.